From beloved art house classics to forgettable horror revivals, these franchises couldn't wait a full 12 months before releasing their next installments. There are sticklers out there who will tell you that the man with no name, the strong, quiet anti-hero played by Clint Eastwood in Sergio Leone's trilogy of landmark westerns, does have a name. In fact, he has 3 names. In 1964's A Fistful of Dollars, wherein our man pits the rival factions of a small frontier town against one another, his name is Joe. In 1965's For a Few Dollars More, however, his name is Monco, and he's a bounty hunter who joins forces with a rival to take down a Mexican bank robber. Finally, in the 1966 semi-prequel The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, he is called Blondie as he races against a ruthless mercenary and a wily bandit to find a stash of Confederate gold. You might have noticed that Eastwood isn't really the same character in each of these films, nor were they released in the same year. After the spaghetti westerns made waves in Italy and across Europe, United Artists released them all in 1967, the first 2 in January and May, and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly in December. The artwork for the American releases emphasized that the films were all of a piece, and introduced the moniker of The Man with No Name in an attempt to bind the films more closely together. The marketing campaign worked like gangbusters, and all these years later, the 3 films are still packaged together as the Man with No Name trilogy. The circumstances that led to both Roger Moore and Sean Connery playing James Bond in 1983 are complicated and go back several decades earlier. In the 50s, Bond author Ian Fleming collaborated with writer Kevin McClory on an unused 007 film script that eventually became the novel Thunderball. Later, in 1961, McClory sued Fleming and eventually was awarded a story credit on the novel's 1965 film adaptation, as well as ownership of certain story elements, most notably the terrorist organization Spectre and its cat-loving leader, Ernst Blofeld. McClory spent more than a decade in various legal battles with United Artists in order to make his own film, and in 1983, he finally got his chance. Never Say Never Again, produced for Warner Brothers, is essentially a remake of Thunderball, with Spectre once again holding the world hostage with a pair of nuclear warheads. Its ace in the hole, of course, is Sean Connery, returning to the role he made famous for the first time since 1971's Diamonds Are Forever.
I hope we're going to have some gratuitous sex and violence.
I certainly hope so, too.
The film also boasts solid action scenes from director Irvin Kershner and a great performance from Barbara Carrera as the scenery-chewing femme fatale, Fatima Blush. Meanwhile, the official Bond franchise kept chugging along in the same year with the very silly Octopussy, which has 007, played by Roger Moore in his 6th appearance, foiling a rogue Soviet general and an exiled Afghan prince with the help of some beautiful circus-trained jewel thieves. In 1984, the Schlockmeisters at Troma Entertainment scored a genuine hit with the superhero parody The Toxic Avenger, in which wimpy janitor Melvin Junko is dumped into a vat of toxic waste and emerges as a monster who dedicates himself to fighting crime. 5 years later, the first superhero from New Jersey returned in The Toxic Avenger Part 2. In the sequel, Toxie travels to Japan to find his long-lost father, leaving Tromaville helpless to the machinations of the supervillain corporation, Apocalypse Incorporated. Thankfully, though, he comes back to save the day. After all,
if Tromaville was destroyed, there would never be a Toxic Avenger Part 3!
The original cut of Part 2 reportedly ran close to 4 hours, so Troma mastermind Lloyd Kaufman did the only sensible thing and made 2 movies out of it. Part 3, subtitled The Last Temptation of Toxie, picks up at the second half of the story. When Toxie returns from Japan and runs Apocalypse Inc. out of town, he finds that he did his job too well, as there are no more bad guys left in Tromaville to defeat. In need of a job to pay for a medical operation that could restore his blind girlfriend's sight, Toxie does the unthinkable and takes a job with Apocalypse Inc. But will success and the trappings of yuppie life spoil our lumpy protector? And is the chairman of the evil corporation even more evil than previously advertised? The Toxic Avenger saga has to be seen to be believed. Polish filmmaker Krzysztof Kieślowski's Three Colors trilogy consists of 3 films that have mostly unrelated characters and plots, but are united in theme and intended as a singular experience. After all, when U.S. critics were preparing their best-of lists for 1994, the films took up one ranking spot instead of three. The title of each installment refers to the three colors of the French flag and the ideals they represent: blue for liberty, white for equality, and red for fraternity. Blue arrived in late 1993, starring Juliette Binoche as a wife and mother who is cruelly liberated by the death of her husband and young child. Struck numb by grief, she strikes up several unexpected connections as she struggles to move forward. White and Red were both released in 1994. The former concerns an unhappy man who, after getting a divorce from his wife, smuggles himself back home to Poland inside a large suitcase. Meanwhile, Red follows a model living in Geneva who connects with a retired judge after she accidentally hits his dog with her car. Each film has the lean efficiency and finely tuned irony of a good short story, and none of them turn out quite as expected. No other single film did more to define sci-fi in the 21st century than the Wachowskis' 1999 hit The Matrix. The dystopian martial arts superhero mashup coined a whole new cinematic language, and its impact can still be seen in its aesthetics, special effects technology, and perhaps unfortunately, in real life today. A sequel was all but guaranteed, but the task of living up to fans' massive expectations was daunting. 4 years after Neo flew through the air at the end of the first film, the Wachowskis returned with not one sequel, but two. The Matrix Reloaded in May 2003, and The Matrix Revolutions 6 months later. The films promised everything a sequel should have, like bigger and better action set pieces and more of the characters we loved from the first film, along with a few answers to the many questions posed by its increasingly convoluted mythology. But while the sequels delivered the goods when it came to the action, The Highway Chase in Reloaded remains an all-timer decades later. It fared less well when trying to untangle its own dorm room philosophical inquiries. Revolutions was largely seen as a disappointing capper to the trilogy, and when Lana Wachowski returned 18 years later to helm the reboot, The Matrix Resurrections, she crafted a proper ending as much as she did a new beginning.
That's the thing about stories. They never really end, do they?
The 2000 Canadian horror flick Ginger Snaps took on the werewolf genre through the lens of female adolescence and puberty, as spooky teen sisters Ginger and Bridget work to control Ginger's violent monthly urges after she is bitten by a werewolf. The 2004 sequel, Ginger Snaps 2 Unleashed, takes a page from A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3, as Bridget, now infected herself, tries to resist her transformations while staying in a rehab facility for teens. Ginger returns from beyond the grave, appearing to Bridget in visions with ghostly advice. Filmed simultaneously with Unleashed, the prequel, Ginger Snaps Back, The Beginning, offers a frontier variation on the series. Stars Catherine Isabelle and Emily Perkins return not as the Ginger and Bridget we know and love from the first two films, but as their 19th century ancestors, also named Ginger and Bridget, who find themselves orphaned and lost in the Canadian wilderness. Where werewolves are a symbol for menstruation in the first film and addiction in the second, Ginger Snaps Back uses the genre's sturdy framework to examine Canada's history of colonialism and Indigenous extermination. Even though the sequels weren't particularly beloved, they weren't particularly hated either, and they both make for entertaining viewing nowadays. The tongue-in-decaying-cheek Return of the Living Dead series ran for 3 bloody, campy entries from 1985 to 1993. But just like a corpse exposed to the military-grade poison gas trioxin, the series rose from the grave more than a decade later. In 2005, 2 brand-new Return of the Living Dead sequels were unleashed upon the world, putting a new generation of teens in the path of shambling corpses hungry for brains. Necropolis, the first of the new sequels, follows a group of high school students whose friend is kidnapped by a nefarious corporation doing research on reanimated bodies. Actor and frequent documentary narrator Peter Coyote guest stars as the doctor in charge of the experiments, and he appears once again in the follow-up, Rave to the Grave.
What is all this for?
Isn't it obvious? World domination. What's everything ultimately for?
Taking place a year after the zombie outbreak that ended Necropolis, Rave to the Grave follows the surviving high schoolers, now in college, as a stray canister of trioxin gets synthesized into a party drug that starts turning ravers into zombies. Beyond using trioxin as the source of the zombie scourge, the films, which wound up going straight to the Sci-Fi Channel, bear little resemblance to the first three, lacking their punk rock sensibility and love for gooey, goopy monsters. Kiyoshi Kurosawa's 2001 horror tragedy Pulse was part of a wave of internationally acclaimed Japanese spine tinglers released at the turn of the millennium. Naturally, its inevitable American remake, directed by Jim Sanzero and co-written by Wes Craven, arrived in theaters in 2006. It stars Kristen Bell as a university student who discovers that her boyfriend's death was caused by a supernatural computer virus that allows the dead to contact the living through the internet. Like the Japanese original, the remake has the courage of its convictions, ending on a note of defeat as the virus takes hold and the spirits of the dead invade the Earth. The two Pulse sequels, both released in 2008, take place in a world overrun with ghosts where the living now exist as refugees in their own homes. Pulse 2, Afterlife, which features a man trying to protect his daughter from the ghost of his vengeful ex-wife, is nearly unwatchable. Every scene appears to have been filmed in front of a green screen. Pulse 3 doesn't fare much better visually or narratively. This post-apocalyptic take on the material features a college student navigating the new world and a young woman who somehow discovers the world's last working laptop. You should probably click away from these sequels if you ever run into them.
I want to turn it off, but I can't.
Swedish crime writer Stieg Larsson's posthumously released Millennium trilogy became a global sensation when the first novel, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, was published in English in 2008. A feature film adaptation from Swedish production company Yellowbird followed in early 2009, along with adaptations of the other two novels in the series, The Girl Who Played with Fire and The Girl Who Kicked the Hornet's Nest, later in the year. The complete trilogy was given a limited theatrical run in the United States in 2010 by the distribution arm of Chicago's Music Box Theater. Starring Noomi Rapace as hacker Lisbeth Salander and Mikael Nyqvist as intrepid journalist Mikael Blomkvist, the films are a pitch-black journey into the sins of Sweden's past. For international audiences, it's also possibly their first taste of the uniquely dark, sexy, and disturbing genre of Scandinavian crime fiction. Director Niels Arden Upplev doesn't shy away from the sexual violence that is endemic to Larsson's work. The original Swedish title of The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo translates to Men Who Hate Women, after all. While the sequels may not have the same visceral thrill as the first film, all three were released together to paint a bleak portrait of a culture that has yet to reckon with the rottenness at its core.